all good. And all right, perfect. So everything that we've covered so far is on the outline. All highlighted green topics should be turned in by tomorrow at 1 o'clock at the latest for full credit. After 1 o'clock, I mean, you're going to be pushing the envelope as far as if I'm going to see it in time to get it in the grade book before I submit final grade. So if you want it to guarantee to count towards your final grade, you got to get in before 1 o'clock tomorrow. All highlighted green assignments and assessments, okay? As far as the final exam goes tomorrow, I will post it at 8 a.m. You'll have till 11 a.m. to finish it. I am going to, I was trying to make it so it's more open-ended for response questions, but with that, I wanted you guys to be able to draw like supply and demand curves, and without knowing for sure if all students are going to have access to a computer to draw on their screen and then submit it. I am just going to do it's going to be a 30 question multiple choice final exam, okay? And the final exam is going to cover the following topics. So it's going to cover anything that we have here on demand, supply, and then the supply and demand. All right, so using the reading guides, the videos, the PowerPoints I posted, the screencasts, anything that's on posted on Google Classroom will be fair game for the final exam from the Unit 3 microeconomics. And then for the macroeconomics section, there'll be some questions on economic measures. All right. I'm going to go over very briefly here this morning, just the basics of fiscal and monetary policy. But there will not be any multiple choice questions on the final exam on that particular topic. Okay. So again, the final exam will be 30 questions, multiple choice, covering all of Unit 3 and then part 1 of Unit 4. Okay, so keep that in mind. You can kind of look through that stuff tonight, review what you need to review, and then, like I said, I will post the multiple choice test tomorrow. This will not be like your previous unit assessments where you can go back and make changes and corrections. Once you submit it, that's it. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're going through the test. Okay, take your time on it and answer the questions in your best ability. All right. And anytime between now and then, if you got questions, feel free to shoot me an email, remind, whatever you need to do. Okay. So let me, on that note, go ahead and cover the fiscal policy stuff. This is a topic I do want to cover just so you guys have the information for the class itself. All right. And like I said, the PowerPoint's already posted. You can go through that on your own as well. But really, the way I like to cover fiscal and monetary policy, because of this is something that's going to impact you and I on a regular basis. Okay, so when we're electing local, state, and federal government officials, these are areas that they're going to be playing a major role in. Presidents as well. All right, but this is one of the areas that I always tell my students, especially government classes, why those midterm elections, all elections are important to vote in, especially when there's members of the House and the Senate up for re-election from your area or your state, because these are the people you're voting for that are going to be making fiscal and monetary policy laws that are going to impact you daily, okay? So what we use fiscal and monetary policy for is to try to achieve some of those things we talked about with economic measures, all right? They're trying to create high growth, so creating higher GDP, low inflation. We don't want the value of our money to decrease quickly, right? In other words, we don't want to see prices skyrocket. Over time, prices are going to go up and down, and they're going to rise, right? From this point to this point, they're going to go up, all right? But we don't want it to be, in a short period of time, prices inflate very quickly, very drastically, all right? The way I always tell my students, you want to kind of see, it's going to be kind of hard to do, but you kind of want to see the price of goods and services and our salaries, our wages to increase at about the same rate. If that's taking place, then we typically don't notice that inflation in society. It's when we have prices do this, and then wages are doing this. All right, that's when we see the discrepancy, because now prices are going up at a much faster rate than the inflation of our wages and salaries. So that could be detrimental to a society for short periods of time until it gets under control. and then also low unemployment. They're trying, federal, state, and just government in general, monetary and fiscal policies are going to try to create those three things. Okay, that's the last bullet point. This is key to the U.S. system. This isn't the case in many, if not, I don't know about most, but many economic systems around the world where the governments do play a large role in the price system. All right, the governments do jump in and say, hey, this is what you can charge or must charge, or this is the max you can charge for a particular product or service, goods or services. In the U.S., our government pretty much, for the most part, stays out of the price system. All right, they don't play a role in there. Every once in a while, they might come in and set some regulations as far as pricing goes, but very rarely do we see that happen. That's part of that economic freedom in the U.S. that we tend to enjoy. All right, and we, personally, I don't think we want the government jumping in and saying we want the government playing a role in our price system. Let's let the prices be determined by how much you and I as consumers are willing to spend on it, and what the business owners, all right, need to make in order to keep that business alive and flourishing, right? So, and trying to find that supply and demand is what ultimately decides our prices, where we as consumers and the producers come to an agreement on a price. Okay. All right. So fiscal policy. This is when we're talking about taxes and government spending. Okay. So sometimes governments are going to tighten up fiscal policy. Sometimes they're going to expand fiscal policy. So, or contract is the idea of tightening it up. All right. So two kind of ways they do this. All right. If they're trying to stimulate the economy, all right, I always say, think of like a cattle prod. Maybe you think it's rude, but a cattle prod is to get the cattle moving, right? It gives them a little shock in the butt, and they get moving a little faster, right? So that's kind of what these concepts of stimulating the economy. Think of it that way, right? The government's going to do certain actions, put in certain policies to try to fire up the economy to get it going again, get us as consumers spending again, get producers producing again. All right, try to create more GDP, try to expand our economic system. Right, so they can try to do this through decreasing taxes or increasing spending. All right, so you got to kind of talk yourself through that and think that through. When they're increasing spending, that means the government's spending more money and trying to create jobs through spending money. Right, so they're gonna, let's say they're gonna spend money on road projects. So that puts a bunch of people to work creating the roads and developing the roads. Now the goal is that those people are now working that weren't working. And typical Americans, when we work, we make money. And what do we love to do with our money? We spend it, right? And then that's the shock to try to get the economy going. Biggest example of that would have been the Great Depression, and with FDR's New Deal. All right, he created all the federal government created all those projects to try to get the economy going again. And at that moment, for that period of time, it worked. It got them back to work. It got people making money again. It got people spending again. All right. So this is that, again, we always have areas of debate on this, like to what extent do we want the government to do that? Because usually, right, if there's going to be more spending by the government, that usually means more taxes by the government. And then that's where those political debates come in. All right. So, that if you guys remember that little political cartoon I showed you on one of the slides where it showed the guy like with his head about to explode, that and the caption said, President Obama needs to do more, but then his shirt said less government, less spending, or whatever it was. And so then that's the debate, right? We're always yelling, when things are bad, government needs to take action. But when they take too much action, then we're yelling and complaining that they're doing too much. All right, they're overstepping their boundaries. So trying to find that middle ground is key. All right, we're having that debate right now with the COVID situation. All right, there's a lot of debate on whether or not the federal government should or shouldn't mandate wearing masks across the country. All right, and the two debates are, yes, the federal government should do that because it's proven, science is proving that it protects people. But then the other side is going to say, well, we don't want the federal government taking that step, because if we allow the federal government to take the step in that area, what's going to stop them from taking large steps like that in other areas in the future? All right, so it's kind of one of those things that we live in a country where we have so much freedom that we have to be, as citizens, we have to be responsible for those freedoms and take some of that responsibility upon ourselves at times to do the right thing. All right, which is trusting others isn't always the easiest thing to do, I guess. So All right, so contractionary fiscal policy is the opposite then. All right, I don't have to go into major detail. It's just the opposite of, instead of spending more, they're spending less, and instead of lowering taxes, they're going to raise taxes. Okay, and this sounds weird, but if the economy is growing too fast, sometimes the government has to do this. All right, they have to come in and say, hey, I'm going to raise taxes, or I'm going to decrease spending in order to slow down the economy. Because remember, I told you guys in yesterday's, if spending, or if the economy is raising at such a fast rate, all right, what goes up must come down. Now we're okay with these ups and downs. Remember, the business cycle kind of taking little speed bumps, but if it goes up really fast, like housing prices did, their values did, they came down really fast. And then, so that's the kind of silver lining, that the government's also, that role they're going to play to try to avoid those huge crashes. And at times, they don't. No politician wants to come out and say we need to raise taxes for everybody, because that's basically a political suicide. You're not going to get reelected if you come out and say that. But there are going to be times that, for the betterment of the country, it's necessary. Which sounds, imagine being a politician having to do that, right? And say that it's not going to go well with the people that have elected you, probably. Okay. All right. So that's ultimately the main idea of fiscal policy. Fiscal policy within our system itself, all right, over the years, really since World War II, the Great Depression, and as the New Deal programs came out, that's where our these automatic stabilizers, as the economists call it, were developed. All right, so after the Great Depression, there was a lot more federal programs that were created to try to automatically stabilize the economy. All right, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. There's a lot, again, another area of a lot of political debate. Do we invest too much into these areas or not enough? Are there too many people that take advantage of some of these options of different welfare entitlements but don't really need them? All right, do people get stuck on the welfare entitlements, and maybe the government's role needs to be more trying to figure out how to get people off the, out of the welfare entitlements rather than putting them into it. So we got tons of political debates on these in this area as well. Okay, but these are what we call the automatic stabilizers that have been developed over time to try to create that, I guess we call it that redistribution of wealth, to try to create somewhat of a more equal playing ground. We call these things the social safety net or public transfer payments. And then our income tax program as a whole, which is a progressive income tax bracket. So the more you make, the more you pay in taxes. Okay. All right. So let's see what I got here. So part of the idea of government spending and fiscal policy, we have to know the difference between debts and deficits. Okay. So just like you and I, if and we did the budget assignment, budget activity, and you only have so much money coming in, we call that revenue. So when I make I make money doing my job, I get my paycheck, and that term we looked at was our net income. How much money do I have in my pocket to spend? That's my revenue. That's how much money I have coming in. And if I'm starting to take out credit cards and I take out more loans and I can't afford those payments, I now have more going out than coming in. All right. So I'm what I call, I'm deficit. I'm in a deficit. Okay. In the now, right? I'm spending more than I have. So I'm in what we call a deficit. But then over time, if I continue to do that, me personally, I'm going to go into more and more debt. Okay. And that's the same way economists measure it on the national level. So if our government creates budgets, all right, where in their budgets, the government spending is here and the revenue is here. Okay. So money coming in through taxes and other things is below what they've decided to spend money on. That difference there is a deficit. Okay. Now, if you add 1 year's deficit to a second year's, to a third year's, to a fourth year's, and you keep adding those deficits up, that's what we eventually call our national debt. Okay. So that's what we've developed over time. Okay. So, and sometimes there's reasons for deficit spending. All right. National emergencies. I mean, today's this is a perfect time to teach this topic with COVID-19. Our federal government has, I think, added $3 trillion to the national debt just in the last few months with COVID, right? Whether it's creating, putting money aside for unemployment, putting money aside where they send, checks out to every American, they put money aside for or putting money into COVID research as far as coming up with a vaccine. So these are things that oftentimes cause deficit spending, in the now, that are sometimes unavoidable, but then other times there are ways to avoid deficit spending. So that's where, again, you and I as voters, and you guys as future voters, need to be educated voters. Know who are you voting for, what is their goal in spending in the budget. Do they want to balance a budget? Do they not? And so on. Okay. So this graph here, I'm not going to go through all the questions, but excuse me, guys. This graph is just showing you guys, over the years, all right, going back to 1981, and then all the way up to 2016 when this particular graph was made, and then kind of the direction we're heading is what it's forecasting, and we're probably still, I would say, even looking at where 2020 would be, we would definitely be on that forecasted trend. Okay, so the red line represents spending, how much money our government's spending, and the blue line represents revenue, so how much money is coming in. All right, so as long as that red line is above the blue line, that's not good. That means we're spending more than what the government has coming in, okay? And just like you and I, if we're spending more than what we have coming in, we're broke, we're gonna go in debt and eventually bankrupt, right? So you can see in early 2000s, all right, during the end of the President Clinton years actually, is when, and going into the second Bush administration was the last time that our budget was balanced, we would call it. It was the last time in many years that we had more coming in than going out. All right, so that's where you can decrease the debt. That's the only way you can decrease the debt, really, is if you have more money coming in than going out, and paying off those debts, just like you and I would have to do. Okay, and then you can see that big peak there where spending went way high and revenues went way low. That was right about 2008, 2009. So as we went through some of those GDP graphs yesterday, this corresponds right with that Great Recession, which usually happens during those time periods. You have to spend a bunch more money as a government because you have to help people, and a lot of people are out of work, so you have a lot less money coming in taxes. Okay, and now with 2020, you're going to see something similar to that, a peak like that with the COVID spending that's taking place. Okay, and obviously a lot of people being out of work, so. Once, over the next couple months, we'll see some more current graphs come up, so I'll be able to update, showing those examples of more current trends. Okay, and then this graph, and we don't have the final numbers for President Trump yet. After his years in office are done, then they'll add these graphs. Are kind of cool to look at because it shows debt by president. So you can see that for the most part through the 30s into the 70s and even into the 80s. We were pretty decent on our national debt, keeping it under $2 trillion, right? And then once we got into the 80s, 90s, it didn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat president, our national debt started to skyrocket. And then during the two presidents prior to President Trump, we saw it go up pretty drastically, all right? With the years of President Bush and, post-September 11th era, you saw our national debt go from $6 to $10 trillion, so it went up by $4 trillion in those 8 years. And then during the Great Recession in the era of President Obama, you saw it go up from about 10 to $19 trillion. So it went up $4 trillion with President Bush, $9 trillion with President Obama, and now it's at least up, I think, $4 trillion right now under President Trump. So we'll kind of see what those numbers look like at the end of his presidency. So this is just showing you the outlook of over the last handful of years as far as what our national debt is doing. Okay, so that's kind of the main thing I'd like to show you guys with fiscal policy. Now let me jump down to the term monetary policy. So monetary policy is looking at the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is the central bank of the U.S. They're the ones in money management, the money supply to our banks. Okay, so in other words, the Federal Reserve dictates how much money is in circulation. Now, this is key for inflation because I told you guys yesterday that inflation is the value of our money, okay? If inflation's taking place, the value of our money is going down. We see it as consumers as prices going up, but it's the value of our money going down. So it's this idea that if you pump too much of something into the system, the value of it decreases, right? Just like, I was thinking of like Jordan shoes, all right? They purposely, when they release a new model or whatever we want to call it, they don't release, an abundance of them. All right. They don't make it so that anyone that wants a pair of the new um, brand of the or new model of the Jordan shoes that come out to be able to get one. They create scarcity, so the value of it goes through the roof. It's just like anything else. If there's very little of it, the value goes up. I always use the example of like a candy bar. If I had 30 candy bars in my classroom with 30 kids in there, all right, I'd probably be able to get maybe sell them for $1 because I'm going to have more candy bars than people that want to buy them. However, if I had one candy bar in my classroom and there's 3 or 4 people that wanted to buy it, now I'm going to be able to raise that price from $1 to $1.50 to, I start kind of bidding on it to see who's willing to pay the highest price. And I might be able to sell that thing for $2, $3, right? So when there's less of it, all right, the value goes up. When there's more of it, the value goes down. And that's the same concept with our actual physical money, okay? So the Federal Reserve needs to try to create monetary policy that's kind of accurate with what the economy is doing. Because then, we don't want to just print more money. We don't want to just pump a bunch of more cash into the system, because then the value of our money goes down very quickly, and then the prices you and I pay for things is going to go up. So the Federal Reserve's job is to try to keep those ups and downs, those little speed bumps in our economy, small, so we don't have those huge increases and drops, okay, based on the money supply side. Fiscal policy is trying to do that, keeping those speed bumps short and small from the taxes and government spending side. This is looking at it from the money supply aspect. Okay, so there are times when the economy's slow, right? The Federal Reserve is going to do things like try to pump more money into the system, all right, to try to get us having access to more cash. Because if we have access to more cash, we as Americans love to spend it, all right. So if we start spending it, then obviously more companies have to produce things, and then more jobs are created, and they might take that approach. But at the same time, if we're spending too much too quickly, they might use contractionary monetary policy and say, okay, we're going to tighten up how much money is in circulation, all right, and tell banks, okay, you can't give out as much in loans, or we're going to pull back some of that money supply, and tell the banks you can't give that out in different ways. Okay, so we're going to hold on to that cash to slow down the economy. Okay, because they might see these small speed bumps, then all of a sudden it starts going like this, and they're going to say, hey, we're going up too quick. All right, we need to do contractionary policy. And some ways they do that is through like things like interest rates. All right, so interest rates are a huge role in whether or not you and I are going to go borrow money to get a car loan, a home loan, or credit cards. Okay, and if the Federal Reserve lowers the interest rates, all right, that's going to encourage people like you and I to say, hey, interest rates are low right now. It might be a good time to go get a car loan, or maybe it's a good time to sell our house or refinance or try to find a new home since interest rates are so low, right? Or borrow money on credit cards, right? So the federal government the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates to be that kind of that cattle prod to kind of fire up the economy, get people spending again. And then if it's going up too fast, they're going to say, hey, we need to raise the interest rates, right? Because they raise the interest rates, now people borrow less and spend less at that moment, right? So interest rates are one way they can do this. The reserve requirement is basically saying how much money banks can loan out. So the Federal Reserve basically tells all the banks you and I go to, you have to have X amount of dollars available in cash, okay? Basically in the reserves in their banks. Because how banks work, they're a business, right? So when you and I put our money into the bank, they're giving that money out as a loan, okay? So all our money is basically invested in people's houses and cars and stuff like that as loans. So when I put my money in the bank, they're going to pay me 1% interest in a basic savings account, but they're going to be charging someone else 5 or 6% interest to use that. All right. So if they're going to give me 1%, but they're charging someone else 6%, well, they're making 5% interest on my money, basically, right? So on all our money combined. So what the Federal Reserve will do then is they'll come in and say, okay, we're going to increase or decrease how much money needs to be available, or in other words, how much money you have available to borrow to people. All right. And by doing that, again, if they make it so there's more money to borrow, more people are going to borrow it, all right, and spend it, and it's going to kind of fire up the economy. And sometimes they'll lower how much money can be borrowed to people, which will slow down the economy. Okay. And then the last way that they do things through monetary policy, which is maybe some of you guys have these from when you were born, are government savings bonds. This is just an investment. So in other words, they'll go out and say, okay, come invest in the U.S. economy or in the U.S. government, which sounds kind of odd, all right? But it's actually the safest of investments. However, it's also the lowest rate of return on an investment, okay? And it takes time to mature. You're going to buy a treasury bill or note or bond, and you're going to say, okay, here's $1,000, all right? I'm going to let you have my $1,000 for 2 years. It's a treasury note or a treasury bill 1 year, or hey, I'm buying a bond, a 20-year bond, right? Or 30-year bond. So you get my $1,000 for 20 years, and then in 20 years, I'm going to cash you in, and you're going to give me, $1,000 back plus whatever the interest is over 20, 30 years, which is not going to be as much as you could have made in other investments or in the stock market, but you're guaranteed a return. Stock market, you can put your $1,000 in and it could be gone in a day, right? Where if you do invest in government bonds, you're guaranteed a return. That's why it's the safest investment, but it's going to be a low rate of return. Okay, so this is a way that, again, the Federal Reserve tries to increase or decrease our economy by either encouraging people to buy these bonds, or then at times, all right, to get money out of the system, right? Hey, come buy treasury bonds. We're going to increase our interest rates on these things to encourage people to put money into them, because then that takes money out of the system. If the money's not in the system, you and I can't spend it, all right? So that's a way they can slow the economy down. And then in other times, they're going to encourage people, hey, cash in your bonds right now, all right? Cash in your treasury bills right now. And then that's going to put money back out in the system. Because if I go cash in my bond, I get my money back, and now I can go spend it on something else, okay? So many people can invest in, really anyone can invest in these. So maybe you've heard, so I put here, whether it's you and I, states, local governments can buy these bonds, but even foreign countries do, all right? And that's why you may have heard the term, we owe China, billions or trillions of dollars. This is what they're talking about, all right? Over the years, federal or foreign governments have bought in treasury bills and notes and bonds. So in other words, other countries believe our economy is so strong and powerful, they're willing to invest in it, right? That's basically what they're saying. Well, at some point, whether it's a 10-year, 2-year, 30-year bond, once those things mature, those foreign governments can say, hey, I want to cash out my treasury bond or my treasury note, and they can get their money back plus the interest. So when you hear that statement or that phrase, we owe, our government, our U.S. owes China X amount of dollars, this is what they're talking about. Okay. All right. That is what I wanted to cover with fiscal and monetary policy. And just kind of ended on one more time, just going back on one second. The outline, because this is it. It's covered everything we've needed to cover. So again, just so everyone's on the same page, the final exam is going to cover Unit 3 microeconomics. All right, anything that's posted on Google Classroom on demand, supply and demand. All right, any of those topics is fair game. And then it will also cover macroeconomics, part 1, economic measures. All right, so use that worksheet and PowerPoint that I went over yesterday to understand, GDP, unemployment, and all those connections between those ideas. Okay, it's going to be, I'm just finishing it up. It's going to be 30 questions, multiple choice. Again, doing the free response, I don't think it was going to work well, because the way the free response questions were written, you're going to have to draw supply and demand curves, and without knowing that everyone has access to a way to draw it digitally and submit it through Google Classroom, I didn't want to create that problem. So it's going to be a 30 question multiple choice final exam. You're going to have from 8 to 11 to complete it. You will only be able to submit this one time. Okay, it's not like my unit assessments where you can fix them and resubmit them. Okay. Other than that, that is what I wanted to cover. So if you want to join or have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask. I will stop recording now.